Welcome back to World History with Dustin Fowler. In this video, we're going to look at the Chinese civilizations in the Yellow River Valley region. While the Mesopotamians, Egyptians, and Indus Valley people were doing their thing, the Chinese have some developments of their own we have to talk about. First, the environment. When we look at the Chinese environment that gave way basically to the civilization that would exist in that area, you've got the same similar song being sung, and that is the existence of rivers that kind of allow for agricultural production to happen, that would allow for surplus food and specialization, all these different characteristics of civilization we discussed. Just like Mesopotamia, just like Egypt, the Chinese had a layer of silt that would land on the ground after rivers flooded, but they called it loess. So make sure that you know the term loess, and it refers to muddy silt that would fertilize the ground and work very, very well for irrigation and for cropping. Also, know that the Yellow River, which is actually called the Huanghe, is known as China's sorrow because of the way it would divert its path or flood and cause so much destruction, death, despair, and gnashing of teeth over time. So many people would perish and lose their lives as a result of the inconsistencies of this river. Also, environmentally, the Chinese are extremely isolated, but not very well protected by natural barriers. Likewise, they would be invaded a lot and conquered a lot, like a lot. Now, the fertile region specifically that we're looking at that supported the civilization in China wasn't modern day China. So keep that in mind, that we're looking at the areas mainly between the Huanghe to the north and the Shang to the south. Two river systems that kind of made this plain that was very, very good for agriculture. It's also very, very important to know that this area around the Huanghe and the Changjiang supported agricultural societies for really long time, like way before civilization emerged in the area. The first civilization that we're going to really discuss, though, was under what we're going to call the Shang dynasty. From very early on, patriarchy, or that is reverence for the most elderly male figures in your family, are extremely important, and there's been a lot of emphasis historically and even today on the importance of male authority figures within the family. And then when you think about your government as family, also for emperors and for social elites. Social classes are set up so there is a very stark contrast between the elites, the haves, and the have-nots, the peasant groups. So a lot of emphasis on social stratification. Women were not given the same degree of privilege in this society. Women between ages of 13 and 16, somewhere around that ballpark area, oftentimes would be married off to other families, where they would then go off and live with those families in their households, under, of course, the leadership of the patriarch. Politically, the emperor was the one who called all the shots. Now, in China, emperors are kind of like, not exactly gods themselves, but they are given the support and the ability to govern by the god called the mandate of heaven. The Chinese considered themselves to be the center of the world and the most important group of people on earth, even though they may have traded with people as far west as Mesopotamia. Here's the thing, though, is that whenever the emperor started to screw up and people didn't like him anymore, and there was natural disasters or invasions or political unrest within the area, then it would seem as though the gods were no longer in favor of the emperor to govern, and thus the emperor will have lost the mandate of heaven. Who gets the mandate of heaven? Well, whoever becomes the next emperor and establishes the next dynasty. What I just described to you is known as the Dynastic Cycle. If you do an image search on Google for Dynastic Cycle, you're going to see all sorts of pictures that demonstrate how this cycle would go from political happiness to age of prosperity to downfall of dynasty, eventually to complete overthrow, and then again and again the dynastic cycle just wages on. It also kind of correlates with our King of the Mountain analogy that we talked about when we looked at Mesopotamian society. For religion, once again, you've got a set of priests to have a lot of power. A lot of times these priests may have been literate, and religion is going to be polytheistic. It's going to be very important in terms of ushering in leadership, as we just now discussed with the dynastic cycle and the mandate of heaven. It is important too, though, to know that the early Shang civilization did have one particular god that they worshipped above all the other. He was like a chief deity that was known as Shang. In terms of intellectual activity, writing once again is going to be something that is clear across the board war with all these civilizations. And the Shang dynasty actually kind of had their own written system that's very, very non-similar to other written systems like cuneiform. Also, like with Mesopotamia and other civilizations we discussed, writing is actually very rare and was reserved for social elites. If you were the son of nobility, for example, or were expected to be one of the social elites, like a priest or whatnot, then you were most likely expected to understand and know how to write in the Chinese form. In terms of technology and understanding, these guys also had a calendar they used. They also studied astronomy and used different types of astronomy and whatnot to decipher the will of the gods, as well as what they would call oracle bones. They also used iron to develop tools and weapons, and they also coined money, which would in turn help them with economic exchanges across the land. Speaking of the economy, let's talk about the economic. These guys did trade with Mesopotamia. I couldn't imagine how long it must have taken these people to traverse the entire continent to do trade, but in time, some of the Chinese inventions, such as silk, for example, was in such high demand by Western societies like Mesopotamia and Egypt, and later on the Romans and whatnot, that the entire back and forth trade network between China and the West would be known as the Silk Road. It wouldn't be until way later during the Byzantine Empire that some people from Turkey actually went and stole the secrets of silk and brought it back to the West and brought it way closer to people of the West. And this right here is what finally diminished silk trade with China. We know that a powerful group known as the Zhou dynasty, not the Zhou, but the Zhou, ended up taking over the Shang dynasty around the year 1027 BCE. A lot of these improvements and a lot of the things that we just discussed about the religion, the technology, and all that began to really take form during the Zhou dynasty. The Zhou dynasty actually governed for a freakishly long amount of time until around 300 BCE, there's going to be an overthrow of the Zhou dynasty, which is going to lead to a period known as the Warring States period. I'm not going to talk too much about the Warring States, but I do want you guys to understand the reason why the Warring States period kind of occurred the way it did was because of the system, the political system that the Chinese had in place, known as feudalism, in which case you have several different areas locally governed by warlords that kind of had this loose alliance with your emperor, or later on in the Middle Ages, your king figure. These different feudal systems are set up in a way that if one of these local lords can amass enough power and enough of a following himself, he can actually, in essence, challenge the authority and the leadership of the king himself, which really gives there to be a lot of incentive for them to try to acquire the people's mandate of heaven so that they can go in and take over the dynasty. What you see starting with the fall of the Zhou dynasty is this tug of war between local lords in an effort to try to control China as a whole. That does it. We've talked about all four of the ancient civilizations and their river valleys and river systems. It is important to know that a river system is not a straight up required part of the recipe for civilization, as we do have American societies that build up not along river valleys in the same way as the four we've discussed in the past 4 videos. If you like the videos, share, subscribe, tell people about what I'm doing here, and stay tuned for more videos on geography and world history. Thank you very much. I'll see you next time.